noticed you're involved in, writing, photography, drawing, painting. When did you first get involved in the arts, and what medium was it?
Crayon. Probably when, in all seriousness, I don't remember ever not drawing. And yeah, I don't ever remember not, expressing myself in art in some way. Um, yeah, this is sort of jumping forward, but I actually found a picture of myself that my mom had dated. I was almost 5. I was 4 years old, and I was in the floor with her makeup, and I had some kiss cards, and I was trying to paint myself like Gene Simmons. So, I mean, even then, it was theatrics, it was art, it was everything. It was it's just part of me.
What was it about Kiss that got you hooked?
The first thing was obviously, at the age I was, it was the visuals. I can't say it was the music. It was absolutely the visuals. I was 4 or 5 years old, and I saw the Alive 2, the gatefold, and they were all engulfed in these flames, and all this makeup and all this crazy stuff was happening. And it looks like Paul Stanley's, even to this day, it looks like Paul Stanley's arm is in the fire. It's not, but it's so that just, I was enamored, and from that moment on, they were like Superman to me.
And I mean, was it? You said the imagery of Kiss is what drew you to them. When did you first get to purchase a record, and how did your parents feel about all that?
Well, my cousin actually gave me Alive 2. That was the first one. And the next record that came out, I actually purchased, the next thing that happened after Alive 2, I got from my parents, and then I actually purchased Dynasty with my own money. My mom actually took me to Montgomery Ward's, and, we flipped through the records and found it. And, they were really supportive. They've always been supportive. I don't have any of those stories where people say, oh, my parents were like, threw out my comic books or did this or that. My dad would buy comic books for me. He went, I was, one of those kids that love rock and roll. He would go to Kmart and buy a cassette for me that I mentioned, I like this band. Or, they would take me to this flea market or this dirt mall, and give me a certain amount of money every Saturday, because they had this one place that had this like huge comic stand of these old 60s and 70s comics that were like 35 cents. And they were like, here's your money for the day. Go pick out your comics. And they'd give me like an hour to go pilfer through these comics while they went and, looked around. So they, from an early age, my dad's still around. Even till now, he's still supportive of this batshit thing that I do, or bat crazy. I don't know if I can say that word, but this crazy thing that I do.
I can't resist. Are you? I mean, I think Dynasty rocks. Where do you stand on Dynasty?
Dude, I think Dynasty's a great record, and people that think it's, they jump immediately to that one song. They're like, oh, Kiss went disco. Dude, if you flip that thing over on the second side of that platter, there's some dark stuff happening in those lyrics. Mm-hmm. That's actually, honestly, lyrically, some pretty dark stuff, or like really out there. They really stepped up the creepy male thing there, in that one. And I'll go to bat for the elder while we're at it. I'll just jump right to it. I'll go straight to bat for the elder as well. I don't give a crap what anybody says. Even Paul Stanley, I'll disagree with him. It's a great record.
I'll be honest. I've only given it a couple of passing listens, but I will say there's something to it. It's not a throwaway. It's not necessarily obviously it really not your. Isn't. It's not your standard Kiss record, obviously, but it's.
Oh no, not at all.
It's one of their more polished, productions.
But there's some great Kiss songs on there,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Sorry, we veered this bus directly into the Kiss traffic right away, didn't we?
It's no problem. All right, Matt, take over before I ask another
I have nothing
question
to contribute to this conversation other than I know of Kiss, I know some of their songs, and that's about it. But would you consider Kiss a gateway to other forms of media, horror, movies, other music?
Yes, they were the gateway to this entire bonkers thing that I do. Absolutely. And I didn't know that at some point they would actually be a part of it. But yeah, obviously, who would ever assume that? But yeah, and again, back to my dad, give him credit. When HBO was a new thing, I'm old enough that HBO was once new and not just a thing you have. And we would get HBO, and we had got this thing called a VCR, which was magic in a box. You could actually record movies and watch them later. I know, crazy. Who knew? Technology, right? But he would record movies for me, and be like, hey, you might like this or you might like that. I mean, my dad recorded Return of the Living Dead for me.
Well, cover that again. You had just mentioned you'd picked up a Night of the Living Dead VHS and it was on a double bill with something.
Yeah, well, actually, I picked for my 11th birthday, I got a VCR, and I got the Three Stooges and the Psychomania and Alice Sweet Alice double bill, and I got that Good Times Night of the Living Dead. And I had a little black and white television, with that tiny little speaker, and it was this, that dirge that just plays when Barbara starts running from Bill from the cemetery to the farmhouse. You just beat the hell out of that speaker because I would play it on 11, and I was just enamored with the film, and I would watch it over and over and over. And that was really the first, and that is the first film that I could literally watch and recite damn near every word as it happened. That was the one. And I was so taken with the film, and it just really opened so many, doors for me as far as getting interested in horror and just filmmaking and, film in general.
Did you pick up immediately that it was George A. Romero directing and start looking for his other works?
As soon as I was sort of savvy to the idea that that's how filmmaking worked, I mean, because I was like 11, so as soon as I was savvy to the idea that that's how films worked, and there was sort of like, more to it than just turning on something and going, wow, this is great, and being starry-eyed, absolutely. And then I was like, I found, Dawn, and then suddenly it was like, oh my God, Starsky and Hutch in hell, I was in love with Dawn of the Dead. So yeah, and then of course, Day, obviously, it's so much fun, and it's such a mean-spirited film, but it's such a great film, and I just love it so much. But yeah, it was George. And I'm not saying that because I'm with you guys right now. It's the truth. That was the first film, and that was the film that really pulled me into the genre and got me so interested in not only film but in horror.
Do you remember any of the next films that you discovered after Night?
Chronologically, no. I do remember, like I was saying earlier, when the internet decided to disagree with us, that when HBO was new, there was a time when HBO was new and everybody didn't just have it. My dad would record things for me, and one of the things I do remember, it was Return of the Living Dead, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is great too. And RoboCop, and there was a lot of stuff around that time. I was like, really, this is all so much fun. But there was another film that my mom and dad, and this is how was the kind of kid I was. They would take me to the video store, and I would rent this movie, this movie or that movie or this movie. But like Dawn of the Dead and Pieces, I would keep to the point that they would never be available for anybody else. And they're like, you're sure you want this movie again? And I'm like, sign me up, sir. By gosh and by golly. Because Pieces.
No, Pieces is amazing. I'm surprised
and it's
you picked
got
up
such
on
a
that
great
one so early.
Soundtrack, it's like it's this, it's not an Italian film, but it's got some great Italian composers on the soundtrack. So it's this perfect weird giallo with this moment of karate in the alley that makes no sense.
I agree. Well, it's really the soundtrack is the only thing that kind of makes it Italian, sort of. But
yeah,
but it has that great little Grateful Dead sounding song when the lady crashes through the glass. There, it's just
it's just batshit.
But I didn't pick up on that one until DVD era, so I'm
Yeah,
impressed
I mean,
that
this
you
I
caught
was
on to that
probably
one
not
early.
11 at that point. I may have been 12.
So the Dawn of the Dead VHS was already out, but you did happen to just through happenstance watch them in order. I mean, our day wasn't out at that time, right?
Yeah, I believe I want to say I believe I did watch them in order. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember these awesome clamshell cases. This everything about VHS. There was so much more heft to those early tapes. They were heavy. They had so much more everything about them. They just meant more. And my God, they cost more too. I mean, it was like you had to mow a lot of lawns to get a movie back then, man.
Talk about your art. How'd you, I mean, other than, the picture with, you drawing on the floor with crayons and Kiss, but I mean, talk about some of your earlier art influences and what were you into?
For me, it was absolutely Bernie Wrightson and Basil Gogos. I mean, those, and everybody says Frazetta because Frazetta, but Wrightson was absolutely 100% my go-to before I even realized it was him. Um, True story. I would take the same copy of this graphic novel to school with me and my Trapper Keeper every day, and I had like a couple of copies of Fango, that kind of stuff. Normal kid. And this graphic novel was this thing that Jim Starlin wrote that Bernie Wrightson illustrated. It was the Thing and the Hulk, and they go to this other planet. It's called the Big Change, and it's just aliens and the Hulk and the Thing. And I was like, this is amazing. And then I realized this guy's name was Bernie Wrightson, and he created the Swamp Thing. And I loved Swamp Thing too, but I hadn't put two and two together at that point. But Bernie's my guy. I mean, I got to meet Bernie. And honestly, of all the people I've ever met, the only time I was ever like a little butterflies in my stomach was Bernie Wrightson. It wasn't being on stage with Gene Simmons or this or that. It was Bernie, because that was for some reason, and I didn't see it coming, but that was the one time I was like a little trepidatious, walking up and, sticking my hand out to somebody. And of all things, it was an artist. But and I own a few of his originals, and I look at him every day while I'm working, and it's just he was always my guy. I could go on. We could do a whole hour on me just blathering about Bernie Wrightson if you'd let me.
And how did that translate into your personal work? How did you?
It didn't at all, because nobody can translate from Bernie Wrightson to their work, because if they say they can, they're lying. Because no, I was really interested, obviously, in the Frankenstein stuff that he did, the early creepy and eerie, and the pen work and the brush work and all the different things, because Bernie would do different things. You could always tell it was him, but he would try different things, but it was always his signature hidden in there. And I was always interested in trying to emulate that, and I would always fail miserably. So I finally failed miserably well enough that I was getting paid to do it professionally. So I guess that's something.
Well, and that's a question I had. What took off first? Was it the writing, the photography, or the artistry?
All the writing and the photography came later, because that was something I was honestly not interested in the least. Truth be told, I just wanted to draw comics, man. That's all I wanted to do. And I started doing like some independent comics, those that were either low or no pay, like everybody was doing in the 90s. And I started working on my own comic book. I had this harebrained idea to create a comic and sort of do it in reverse and base everybody in the comic on real celebrities. And I actually had the band Typo Negative was involved. They were going to be in concert in the comic. And of all people, Julie Strain was like, yeah, I'll do that. I'll be your main character. So God bless her. Julie Strain, if you're not familiar, she was the 93 Penthouse Pet of the Year. And she happened to be married to this guy named Kevin Eastman, who created the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. And Kevin owns Heavy Metal Magazine. And as luck would have it, that project sort of fell apart. So I had contacted, because I don't know how to do anything the normal way. So I contacted this guy named Andy Sedaris. He was a filmmaker that started off working in television, he went on to ABC and directed The Wide World of Sports, Monday Night Football, and he made these late night B movies. And Julie was actually in a lot of those. And so there was, of all things, Julie Strain was actually the catalyst for my career, to be honest. And before it was over with, I was at Heavy Metal as the designer of a book for Andy, and Julie was in the book, and I was working for Kevin Eastman, and I was in LA and doing this thing with Heavy Metal. So it was sort of like this weird, this little kid from the middle of nowhere in Texas, they drug him to Hollywood to make a book for no reason, because there's plenty of people out there that could have done it. I wish I really had a logical reason as to why it all worked out, but it did.
Can you talk about your day-to-day, how you worked on an issue, what meeting a deadline was like at Heavy Metal magazine?
Well, my time at Heavy Metal was all actually centered around one book. So I didn't actually work on the magazine. It was actually one of the hardcover books of all things. So again, nothing normal with me. But we actually worked at Andy's house and at Kevin's house. It was a bizarrely comfortable experience, because I actually brought my own computer, and my wife and my kid, we all just went to LA and stayed in Beverly Hills at Andy's house, and I worked on this book. There's no reason it should have gone as well as it did. It sounds stupid, but it's true. And it went really well. And after that, I did some more small projects, because the Heavy Metal thing was sort of like a one and done, because Heavy Metal had, at the time, mostly, European artists, and they sort of had their schedule set quite a bit in advance. So, those one-off projects is what I was a part of there. And after that, it sort of went in a bit of a decline, as far as, the bubble sort of burst, at least for me, and I guess a lot of people, as far as doing, the independent work. And for a while, I actually had, of all things, a saltwater fish shop. So that ties right into zombies and comics, right? We raised coral, and I had octopus and stingray and sharks. And I was always hoping I'd be the guy that would be, landlocked in Texas and die of a shark attack in my home, but it never worked out. But by God, you can't say I didn't try. So...
Do you ever drop a toy zombie down and have one of your sharks attack it, like in Fulci Zombie?
I should have, and also a new diver. I should have had both. And after that, I just sort of fell back into it. Sort of gradually. I'm not going to use the word organically, because I don't like that word. But I just sort of gradually, fell back into wanting to sort of meet that need inside myself. It's like I always loved. It wasn't by happenstance that I started the saltwater fish shop, because I almost went into marine biology. I was always really interested in that stuff and really interested in art. So I sort of got my fill of that and went back into the art thing. And ultimately, I met Chris Alexander, and we hit it off, and I ended up working at Fangoria, and I worked there until Fango ended. When we brought back Gorezone, I did some cover work on Gorezone, some centerfolds in Fango, and Chris actually gave me my first writing job. He introduced me to George Romero, and I introduced him to Ace Frehley, because I knew Ace from doing these conventions. I'm sort of jumping forward just for the sake of this could get too convoluted. But, I worked at Fango until the end. And when Fango ended, we, three of us, Chris and I and Bill, wanted to keep making magazines. And so we launched our company, Fantasm. And, Chris and Bill kept on with what they were doing at Delirium. And now my wife and I are doing Fantasm. So that's the really short, but still too long version of the story.
Can you talk about your interview process? How did Chris bring you on to Fangoria? Because I'm assuming you had been reading it.
Yeah. Actually, when I had mentioned earlier, I'd take a couple of issues to Fango to school with me. I was such a Kiss fan. One of the issues I always loved was when they had Gene Simmons in Fangoria, because I thought it was so cool. You've got monsters and you've got Gene. And I introduced when Chris and I were at a convention as Fango. I introduced him to Ace Frehley, and I said, wouldn't it be cool if Ace was in Fango? I said, Gene was years ago. He's like, well, why don't you interview him? I'm like, I don't do that. He's like, well, you do now. So, I called him up and we did it. I did some artwork for it, and that was actually the first thing I did in Fangoria was to bring Kiss back to Fangoria. So I thought that was pretty cool,
I wanted to mention earlier, you're like the third or fourth person we've had on here that talked about bringing Fangorias in a briefcase to school. No lie.
Well, it was what you did instead of studying,
Did you ever get in trouble for bringing one?
No, I really didn't. I never had one of those teachers. When I was in elementary school, I would get in trouble for drawing too much during class because they thought I wasn't listening, but I was. I was an auditory learner, so I could sit there and sketch or doodle or whatever, and I could recite back whatever they were telling me, short of, algebra, within reason, because I was listening. But there was one teacher that just wasn't having it. But as I got on into junior high school, all the teachers sort of were okay with it because my grades were good. And, I minded my business. I would sit and draw. I kept my mouth shut. I say that. That's not really true, but I say that. And, I really didn't have any problems with it. They were really kind of cool about it. I just don't have any of those horror stories that people have, growing up. I liked horror and I was shunned, and I didn't really have that.
For Fangoria or Gorezone, how would you receive an assignment? And were you reporting to an office, or how did that work?
Oh no, I was here in my office in Texas where I'm sitting right now, and Chris and I would either talk on the phone or I would text him, email him. He'd text or email me, and we would just like, hey, you want to do this? Or I'd be like, hey, can I do this? And it was pretty free and loose, at least at the time that I was at Fangoria, and the working relationship I had with Chris. Honestly, there's no way it could have been better if I had paid him to be nicer and more giving and just all around awesome to me. He was and is just the best. And he owes me $5 for saying that, so be sure and let him know.
So what spurred on the creation of Fantasm Media? What was the environment? What was the climate?
Well, Fango had ended, and Chris had already left Fangoria when it ended, and it sort of, I won't go into all the details of how it went down, but there were some problems at the end of Fangoria, at least with some other people had other issues. I had issues with some of the things that went the way they did, and ultimately, Fangoria ended. And Chris called me and was like, hey, we should keep making magazines. And I'm like, yes, we should. So that's really how it went. And Chris actually reached out to George and said, hey, we're trying to get this fledgling company off the ground. And George was cool enough to let us, basically launch the company off his back. God's truth. I mean, the Romeros were so good to us to allow us to do that. And, we, I can't think of the right nice words to say how much gratitude there was for that, And again, not because I'm on this show, it's just the truth, it really is. That's, George and Suze were amazing. And it was weird because I'd actually was George's webmaster. I built these, the first, I guess, sort of really basic site for him. And then that was right before we started Fantasm. And it just went from there.
What would you say the mission of Fantasm as a magazine is?
The idea that we sort of followed and still do follow was each issue of Fantasm Presents is sort of a self-contained book that you really could pick up this month or next year, and it's not going to be out of date with, so to speak. I mean, we're not selling you what's going to be coming out at the, the movies this weekend, or, it's single subject, self-contained. You're not going to get 5 articles about Friday the 13th and 1 Halloween. It's all, if we're doing a Friday the 13th issue, that's all it is. That's it, front to back. So that I feel like that there are other magazine companies that are doing what they're doing, and it's working. And so that was sort of the approach we took. And I'm not saying that we won't eventually maybe try something else in addition to, but as far as Phantasm Presents, that magazine will stay single subject issues. Now, that's not to say we won't do multiple issues about a subject, but it's going to be that's the aim, and that's going to continue to be the aim there. But I've got one here, but that was the first issue we did.
Yeah,
with George. I'm sure you guys have seen it.
That was my next question. Was actually talk about the difficulty in releasing the first magazine in August of 2017. Obviously, that had to be in process during his passing.
Yes, it was. And we, I would say the magazine was probably a third completed when he passed. He saw the cover. I don't know how much of the contents he honestly saw. I know he saw the cover. That's all I can say for sure. That he actually saw, but I do know he was on board with us doing it, and was kind enough to do that. But he was not well at that time, so there was not any direct involvement.
You mentioned doing multiple issues on a subject. You've actually now done 3 on George, the second one being the Night of the Living Dead issue.
Yeah, and I kept thinking we were going to get away from the dead, and the dead just won't leave me alone. It's great.
And actually, the night issue I was able to pick up at the 50th anniversary screening. They used that as the program.
Yeah, that's actually why we made it.
Okay.
Did you get the which cover did you get? Did you get this one or the other one?
Other one.
Okay, cool. Those were only available that night at the Biome. When we did that issue, our second issue was with Linnea, and we were going to head in this direction. And Gary actually called me and said, "Hey, we're doing this 50th anniversary re-release, and we would love to have a magazine." I think I briefly talked to him at Living Dead Weekend about it prior to that, but I didn't, honestly, not to say that Gary's not completely credible, but I didn't think he would remember to reach out to me, because I don't consider us to be that important in the scheme of releasing his film again for 50 years. I didn't think that we were going to be so high on his list of to-dos, but we were. And he called, and we created the magazine for that event.
And then just here recently, you've released a third issue, which is kind of like a sequel to the part 1.
We did, and again, excuse me, and if you don't mind, in between releasing Night and this third issue, 2 years ago, right before COVID struck, they actually had me go to Pittsburgh to do some of the special features for the new Dawn of the Dead box set that Second Sight did. So we did that. Again, thinking I'm moving on from the zombies.
Take a minute. Take a minute on that. What did you work on?
Okay. So I was helping out, making sure that they got a hold of everybody for the Bikers and Zombies, and we did the walkthrough with Tom and Michael Gornick at the mall. We spent some time at Tom's house, which is fascinating. We managed to get a lot of Bikers and Zombies from Dawn that had never been interviewed about their time on the film. And over, we would ask these questions, and it always came back to how, honestly, how pleasant it was to work on it. Family was a word that came up so many times. And if you guys watch the Blu-ray, if you get a hold of it, it is Region B. So if you have the player, you can watch it. You'll hear this word, this theme keeps coming up of family, and it absolutely is a family environment up there. In Pittsburgh. And I say up there because I'm down here in Texas. But it was such a great experience to work on that, and a lot of these people that I was friends with or acquainted with after that, I was either better friends with or became friends with. So it was a really great experience.
I just want to congratulate you on those extras from that release. That was amazing, especially the Bikers and Zombies documentary.
Thank you. And David Gregory, that directed those, deserves a lot of kudos. He that runs and owns Severin Films. They did a phenomenal job, and they contacted me and asked me to help out with that, and I was honored to do it, and they knocked it out of the park. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I love that box set. I was more excited for the special features than I was seeing the film in any presentation. That was the purchase price for me was like I just want the extras. That's all I wanted.
And to be fair, even though my name is on it, I bought extras for me because it's such a cool box set. And Second Sight, gosh, man, if they would only make box sets like that for every movie that I love. That is honestly one of the neatest box sets ever. It really is. Even if my name wasn't on it, which makes it way better. But
But I think I kind of sidetracked you from the third Romero issue.
Yeah, right. Sorry. Yeah, and so after that, COVID hit, and I honestly had no intention of returning to the Romero well so soon. But the more this went on, it was like, my gosh, we're really living in the closest version of George's films we'll ever live in. You leave your home, your neighbor could kill you. People are hoarding supplies. It's the government, science, and politics are clashing just like in the Crazies. I mean, this is honest to God, we're living in George's art. And so the third issue we actually created in quarantine. We interviewed people at different times throughout the year. So the conversation and the questions aren't always going to seem like this is all happening at the same time, because it didn't. They happened throughout the year. I actually talked to Suze Romero on American Election Day, which was really interesting because at that time we hadn't, seen the outcome of our new president, getting elected, and it was really interesting. And then we did some interviews after. So the magazine is really, there's some uncertainty in some interviews, and then there's some hopefulness in some interviews, but it really sort of is a time capsule of that horrible year, but at the same time it's sort of a reflection of George's art in our world. So it just seemed like the right thing to do. But to be attached to in any small way to something as great as what he created, it's awesome. So who knows? There may be a fourth trip to the well. I won't say that there will be, but we've all seen bands come out of retirement, so I'm not going to be that guy. It may be the 75th time Ozzy hit the stage or Kiss, but hey.
I wanted to ask, well, you mentioned COVID, and the lockdown and everything, and obviously you guys work remotely. There's not a home office. I mean, so how... No. What is the ultimate business model for Fantasm, and did COVID-19 knock that off the track, or did it have any impact at all?
Absolutely. I'm not going to lie to you and say, oh no, we were fine. It absolutely it changed the trajectory of what we were doing at the time. That was at the time we were actually doing the official Kiss magazine, or the official Kiss poster book. And when COVID hit, touring happened. Licenses weren't renewed because, I can only assume with the uncertainty of COVID, who knows? But yeah, it just, that was a pretty abrupt end. COVID affected, obviously we couldn't go to conventions. We couldn't see people face to face, have those grassroots conversations. And let's be honest, even before COVID, dude, magazines are made out of paper, and stuff is hard. And I say stuff like physical, tangible media in a world of streaming it's not the same. magazine numbers in general are not what they used to be, long before COVID. So it absolutely was a challenge, but we're still here. I mean,
Where do you see print's place in this digital / social media, get your news now immediately world?
well, interestingly, I think I'd be lying if I said print is not as important as it used to be. I make paper, but let's be honest, nobody runs to their driveway to grab the morning news to see what's happening in the world. Nobody does that, or so few that it doesn't register. Um, People scroll to see how the world is burning these days. It's we always want to see that train wreck, and we're going to scroll for it. We're not going to leaf through to do that anymore. So as a whole, physical media has been reduced. I don't think it's going to be gone completely. It's just sort of like how vinyl has made such a comeback. If you go to a Walmart or a Best Buy, there's 4, maybe 8, 12 feet. You go to Target, there's an entire aisle. That's a lot of real estate in a big box store for a physical media that was dead a few years ago. You'll see an end cap of CDs, but 12 feet of vinyl. So my point is collectability. I think a lot of people that want tangible collectibles are still going to buy. So that's where I hope our business model works, where if you pick up our magazine this month or a year from now, it's not antiquated by a year. It's still sort of, the same product now that it will be then, because we're not selling you what's coming out this week with Phantasm Presents. So long story short, and a bit of a plug in the answer, I think that as long as people are interested in collectibles and collectability, at least our little nook in publishing will make sense, for the foreseeable future.
Well, and how about your anticipated just release schedule? How does that work? And then as far as like passing out assignments to writers and such, and drawing that all in for deadlines. How does that work at Phantasm?
I have to say that we learned trial by fire that, again, because of the business model of the Phantasm Presents magazine. Excuse me. Iron City beer. What happens is let's say you're putting out an issue of horror movies monthly, okay? And you've got Freddy and you've got a Jason and you've got a Michael Myers, and you're like, my gosh, I really need that Walking Dead article. Bob, where's that Walking Dead article? He's like, my dog died. So you grab, hey, Darcy, let me have that Child's Play article. Boom. Magazine finished. Take it to the printer. Okay? Problem solved. With what we do, we can't really do that. And we learned with a couple of releases that, to do the magazine the right way, to really get what we needed from either the people we were trying to contact, things like that, we don't release until it's time. So it's not necessarily quarterly or monthly. It's when it's ready. And I know that's a weird print schedule, especially when print's already struggling. And that's why we also don't offer a subscription currently, because I haven't found a model that I think is fair to the customer. Because if you're a customer and you send me $60 for 4 issues or whatever the numbers are, I'm just using arbitrary numbers. Well, what if we do an issue that, is absolutely 100% not your cup of tea? Well, you bought that issue, and literally everything in that issue you bought and paid for, and you're stuck with it. Also, I can't necessarily promise you 8 issues in 12 months or 6 issues in 12 months if the quality and the content isn't absolutely what we need it to be. So it's a sliding scale. That I could have just said that last thing. This is sliding scale, but I wanted to go with the long answer.
What issue has garnered you the most feedback?
Our Kiss issues did really well for us. It's a different audience, and it's an audience that is very particular. And I'm one of those fans, so I get it. It's like, if you're going to do an article that's all about Alive 2 and you decide to do it in the colors of Creatures of the Night, you look like an idiot. So I mean, it's very, very particular that you have all the details finely placed. So Kiss fans were honestly really, really supportive and receptive because luckily I'm a bit of a Kiss nut, so I knew by and large we're not to screw up. Our Romero issues, honestly, I'm going too long here. Let me just be honest with you. All the issues that we've done, we've I'm not going to lie, and we've actually had the feedback that we've gotten has usually been by and large pretty positive because we make sure that if we're going to go into something, we go into it from a fan's perspective. Like if we're going to do, like I said, for example, a Kiss thing, and we're going to do these 3 articles, we're going to make sure that we cross our I's and dot our T's all the way down to this color scheme. Which seems crazy, but it works for us. So, by and large, people are like, wow, we didn't expect these little details. All the way down to our story stops. I even make a point to do, special story stops. We did Texas Chainsaw Massacre. John Dugan got a hammer, which is silly that somebody would go to the trouble, but it's silly that you wouldn't go to the trouble.
And you mentioned, or I think Matt actually mentioned, making the importance of making the issues collectible. And I've noticed you've done a lot of variant covers. How popular has that been for you?
The variant covers have actually been great for us, and that actually came from my love of comics and my background in comics. There used to be a lot of variant covers in comics, and there still are, but variant covers in comics was a big collectible thing. And I always thought they were just fun. Obviously nobody's going to make you run out and get all the different variants, but you can look at it 2 ways. There's 2 or 3 different versions to collect, or pick the version you like best. So I think those are, to me, they're just fun. I like gimmicks. Again, I go back to Kiss. When we did the Kiss magazines, we actually did trading cards, and you'd get random cards with each different cover that you bought. So you could actually build a set of cards. I love gimmicks. On the front of, the first George, we have the painting, but on the back, cereal box time, kids. We did a George Romero mask. I just love stuff like that. It's fun. Why not have fun with it? We actually, when we did our Sid Haig issue, I'd worked with Sid for some time, actually over a couple of years. We would do sitting interview. We had a sort of a set time he and I would call each other, and we would do an interview, and we were just slowly working through his career. And Sid actually passed before the magazine came out, and I wasn't even going to release it. And my wife started transcribing all these hours and hours, and she's like, you really should do something with this. And I didn't really want to sort of be one of those guys like, oh, he's passed away, now's the time to cash in. And it seemed to work out. His family seemed to be very appreciative that we did it, or they not seemed to be. They were very appreciative that we did it. And I think, my point is that was one that we actually, Sid and I had some variant covers planned, and we actually even had some gimmicks planned for the back cover. Like, you remember the cardboard skeleton that had the brads and the joints that you would hang up for Halloween? You could pose his arms, and the black cat and all that. We were actually going to do a Captain Spaulding, and we're going to have Tutti Frutti or a gun where you could actually swap out his arm. And, when you built him, it would be, but it didn't seem right after he passed to do that. But he and I actually had talked about it. I had a painted cover. The cover that we used was one that I shot when we were in Vegas. He got into costume. We did that. But, we planned on doing variants for Sid's, but it just didn't seem appropriate. But those were, honestly, I had to tell you about those because I think that would have been the greatest one ever.
I also wanted to ask about your experience writing with Delirium. Can you talk about that for a moment?
No, I'm kidding. No, actually, my working with Delirium was great because it was, again, my friend Chris. Chris Alexander runs the Delirium, and it's a great magazine. It was a great magazine to write for. I had a blast, and who knows if there's a spot and it makes sense for Chris and it makes sense for me. Absolutely, one I would. Anytime they needed me, I'd write for them again. If they needed my crappy words, I would absolutely never turn them down. They're a hell of a great magazine, and I really enjoyed it. There was a lot of creative freedom. Um, I was allowed to sort of go all over the place. Chris would come up with ideas for covers and be like, "Hey, you want to paint this?" I'm like, "Well, yeah." And again, we even did a Gene Simmons issue, so we got to interview Gene, put Gene on the cover. It's Kiss and George, man. It's my life.
If profit is not a concern, what's something you would just like to work on out of personal interest?
I'd be lying if I said I'm not a Star Wars fan. I mean, I came from that era. Obviously, Star Wars would be a really great, slide to one side from either one of, Romero or Kiss. Yeah, I'll go with that. I don't know. I don't know that the world needs a Back to the Future magazine, but I do love Back to the Future. I also love spaghetti westerns. I always disappoint people at conventions. They'll ask me, "What are some of your favorite films?" And I'll start listing all these spaghetti westerns or old giallos they've never heard of, and then I'll throw in Back to the Future and Ghostbusters, and they'll walk off going, "I thought he liked horror movies."
Emergency. You are to tune